Hi guys, how are we all doing? Today I wanted to talk about gender disappointment, and I'm going to film this video in two halves. So first half I'm obviously filming now, and this is a day before we find out the gender of our baby, which feels quite strange. I'm 17 weeks now, so we've gone for a private scan, cost 40 quid, in a very privileged position that we can go and do that, but I have no sense of patience at all, so very excited to be over finding out the gender tomorrow, or the sex of the baby. Other half of the video I'm going to film after we've found out the sex of the baby. And gender disappointment has always been a really interesting one for me. So if you don't know what gender disappointment is, I'm going to read the Wikipedia definition. So it's the feeling of sadness when a parent's strong desire for a child of a particular or preferred sex is not met. So before I go into this, I want to acknowledge there's a very different distinction between gender and sex. Thank you for Alice for pointing this out to me on Instagram this morning. Music of Alice. If you haven't checked her out, do. Amazing music. But there is a very big distinction. So sex is purely biological, that is what you are born as, and then your gender is quite often assigned at birth, but can then be a little bit more fluid as you get older. So obviously we know now that people can choose to be male or female as they become older, as they make decisions for themselves about who they see themselves as a person. I think someone's at my door. Okay, no one's at my door. I was imagining it. Right, so where was I? So today I am going to be using these terms interchangeably, partially because I'm going to try my best to only talk about sex, but because the phrase is gender disappointment rather than sex disappointment, for obvious reasons I imagine. Sounds like two very different things, but it becomes a difficult topic if I start trying to switch sex for gender, because yeah, sex disappointment is a very different video, which I probably will never film. Okay? Right, good. So where do we start? I wanted to film this video for a couple of reasons. So firstly, because everyone has been asking me what gender we would like, or what sex we would like the child to be. And the generally socially accepted phrase, at least here in the UK, is I don't mind as long as they're healthy and they're happy. And this phrase has always bothered me for a couple of reasons. One, what do we determine as healthy? Because Hugh and I have already discussed, like, if the baby is missing an arm or a leg, or we know they're not now because we've had numerous scans, but if they were, that's totally fine. But would you consider that not healthy? To me, I consider that healthy because, I mean, Jesus, for all I know, they could have terrible mental health. So actually it's great that they have physical health enough that they are just missing a limb, you know? I hate that we decide what we think is healthy versus happy, versus somebody could look physically healthy but not be happy. And why do we tie these two things together? It's always really, it plays on me. But also the main point of this video is that gender disappointment is really common. 1 in 5 women, and I'm predominantly talking about women here rather than men because I don't know the male perspective, and I'm not going to try and suggest that I do. I don't have the same experiences to talk about, but from a woman's perspective, 1 in 5 women are estimated to go through gender disappointment, which is huge. And if you consider actually a great deal more of those women may have gone through gender disappointment if they didn't get the gender or the sex which they were expecting in their head. So actually that number could be, or has the potential to be, predominantly higher than 1 in 5, and still we're forced to pretend like we are okay with any gender or any sex, which, to be fair, yes, we will be fine with it. I'm sure I'll be fine with it. So that you're aware, I want a girl. I know that I want a girl because for most of my life, whenever I've pictured having a child, I've always pictured a little girl. It's not that I've made a conscious thought about the fact that I want a girl over a boy. It's not that at all. It's that's just the picture in my mind's eye. I can't help it. That's what I've always just envisioned. And I get that not everybody will have this, but a lot of us will, because if you're a seeing individual and you see images in your brain when you think of things, it's very hard to imagine a gender neutral child. It's just not something that we naturally do. Although actually, the conversation I was having with Alice earlier, it is something that some people do, I now know. And so it's really difficult when you're pregnant, having no control over whether it's going to be male or a female, your baby, to just pretend that you don't mind either way. And yes, I'm sure when it's born, lots of people talk about having gender disappointment from their 20-week scan up until the birth, and then the moment they have the birth, it just disappears because they love their child, because their child is with them, they see them, you don't really care. And that is, I'm sure, the case for me. And actually, because I knew that gender disappointment would be a really big thing for me, and I'm not embarrassed to say that, I'm not scared of saying that, I've always wanted a girl, I'm not worried about that, But I said to my husband when we found out that we were pregnant, I don't want to think of any girls' names. I don't want to look at any girls' clothes. I don't want to plan for a girl at all. From this point onwards, we're planning for a boy. And over the last 17 weeks, I've slowly been changing my perception of that visual in my mind's eye, because I've realised that actually this gender disappointment that I was veering towards, even though I had no idea either way, and I still don't have any idea either way if I'm having a boy or a girl, I was already feeling disappointed that we were having a boy, which was crazy. I wasn't enjoying the first trimester because I was thinking, well, we're having a boy, whereas I switched my mindset and I made Pinterest boards planning outfits for boys, which, by the way, can someone please develop a clothing line for cute boys' clothes, because it's not a thing, it's just not a thing, and lots of the clothes that we'll pick will be unisex anyway, because the whole boys versus girls clothes kind of grosses me out. In fact, so many issues about boys versus girls and gender stereotypes in childhood. That's a whole other video, a whole series of videos potentially. But the point is, we have now planned the name for the boy if we have a boy. Don't have any names set aside for a girl. I have a list of about 50 names that I've compiled over the years, but we have only planned for this boy outcome. So I know that now tomorrow, if we find out that we're having a boy, I will still probably be disappointed, because that image will be completely gone from my head of me and Hugh walking around with our little girl. But I also now have an image of a little boy in my head, because I've trained myself to think that way effectively, and it is working. But there will be momentary disappointment, and I think we need to share that more. You know, at least in the UK, but it might go further than this, as just a generation. Why do we it's the same thing about my issues with why we don't share that we're pregnant for the first 12 weeks just because it's risky. You are assuming that the pregnant woman doesn't need support. You are completely putting her emotions to the side at risk of upsetting somebody else. So in the first 12 weeks, you generally don't tell people because you're worried that you'll have to let people down, you'll have to let parents-in-law down, that you're suddenly not having a child anymore, when in actuality it's an incredibly traumatic experience to go through as a woman and as a father, and you've lost your child, you're grieving your child, you need support through that. And with gender disappointment, we're pressured into acting like whatever happens, it's fine, we'll love them either way, because of course you'll love them either way. But that doesn't mean you should not acknowledge the feelings and the emotions that go with grieving the loss of your idealized child, which is effectively what gender disappointment is. It's grieving for the loss of a child that you've never had, that you thought you were going to have, and you've had that image of that child potentially for your whole life. Potentially you've grown up picturing yourself with an image of a child, and suddenly that image is something completely different. And as a pregnant woman, I mean, you share your body with another human being, and if you're watching this and you're pregnant, you'll probably get what I mean, because I didn't get this fully before I was pregnant, but it's the only time in your life, and this sounds really ridiculous when you say it, but when you're feeling it, it's the only time in your life where your body is not your own. You share it with another human being, which is terrifying. You don't have control over it. Your body is 50-50, yours and somebody else's. And what's really scary about gender disappointment is that the other 50% of your body that you're sharing with somebody else for that period of time after you find out the gender could potentially be another 20 weeks sharing a body with someone that you no longer feel like you know. Because when in your head and you don't know the gender, and if you think they're a girl but they're actually going to be a boy, and you've always had this image of a girl or the other way around in your head, to suddenly find out that they are something other than what you believed, it feels like you don't know them. Even though you really don't know them either way, you've lost that image of them. And for me, although I haven't been through it, I can imagine how world-shifting that could be, I suppose. And I don't think we put enough time into helping women with that. I was talking to my midwife, and she was saying that you'd be surprised that actually a huge percentage, she was saying she thinks over 50% of women leave the room when they're being scanned and they find out their gender and they do the gender scan. She's saying she thinks over 50, and this is just a complete finger in the air, but that over 50% of women leave that room in tears, or they're in tears and they dry their eyes so that they don't look like they're crying when they leave the room because they're embarrassed, which is awful. You're allowed to feel your feelings. You're allowed to feel. It doesn't mean that you don't love the child, and I think this is the major misconception that people have. Just because you're disappointed that the image of that idealized child in your head is not what's going to come out the other side, literally come out the other side, that doesn't mean you don't love them. Because at the end of the day, you're fully aware that the child will not be what I picture them to be as soon as they're born. I will suddenly have a whole new viewpoint of who they are, and they will tell me who they are as they get older. And the image that I have of myself as a parent taking my child to a stationery shop when they're 6 and buying all the pretty new stationery for school and the pens and all of that, I am pretty sure that I would not get my ideal child who wants to do that just because I love that. And you have to be very aware of that, I think. Otherwise you end up trying to make a mini version of yourself, which is terrifying, to be honest. But the point is, I guess, that you have to be allowed to go through that process of realising they're not who they are and realising they're not who you expect them to be. And if it's something that socially you're forced to keep hidden and you're forced to say, oh, healthy and happy, as long as they're healthy and happy, then it can be a very lonely time, or I imagine it can be a very lonely time. So in all honesty, when I think about tomorrow and I think about our gender scan, I feel very excited. And in my heart of hearts, I feel like I know that it's a boy. And I feel very emotional talking about it because I feel like I could cry, but almost not out of sadness, almost out of relief, I think, for knowing, because it's something that in my head, my whole life, I've always wanted a girl. And it's kind of like I don't know. It's hard to summarise how I'm going to feel. And there are far more important things as well. I mean, I was saying that I want to do a video about gender and gender stereotypes if maybe a few months' time, or maybe once the baby is born, because it does concern. I watched a really good documentary a few years ago about the way that parents of girls and parents of boys treat their children very differently without meaning to. So for example, one of the tests, they had a ramp, and they were each parent was put into a separate room with a ramp with their child, and they were told to put the ramp to a certain degree depending on what they thought the child could handle. And they found that 100% of the parents of the boys put it on a steeper ramp than all of the parents of the girls, and all of the parents of the girls, almost, not quite, but almost, jumped in to help the girl faster than the parents of the boys, which is terrifying. And all of these subconscious barriers, basically restraints that we put on our children just because of what we perceive a girl or a boy to be capable of, is just terrifying. The other thing I wanted to touch upon, I suppose, before I cut to post finding out, is this idea, and this actually came from someone who messaged me on Instagram earlier, but it's this idea that maybe we shouldn't talk about gender disappointment because it could upset people who are trying to conceive, or it could trigger people who are trying to conceive. And I'm very conscious of this, not least because I've only really started talking about pregnancy and babies since we've become pregnant. I never really talked about trying to conceive and all of this. And I would hate my content to make someone feel uncomfortable. And I would always just say, look, if pregnancy isn't something you want to hear about, or you're not okay hearing about right now, I would never be upset for someone for unfollowing me or unsubscribing or just taking a time out from my channel because it's too hard for them. That's totally fine, and I totally understand that, and I would never ever judge anybody for that. But on the same level, I don't feel like women should be told they can't talk about gender disappointment because it could be upsetting to somebody who can't get pregnant or is struggling to get pregnant, because they would be happy to have either gender, and that's fine. Of course, I totally appreciate that. I'm very privileged to be able to have these feelings because I'm very privileged to have been able to get pregnant and get pregnant the first time we tried. But that doesn't mean that your feelings are completely invalid simply because someone else has a more difficult experience or a different experience than you're going through. It shouldn't cancel out your emotions. And I think the risk that we get into these days is that if you're too nervous about upsetting somebody else, then you actually end up doing real damage to yourself and your own mental health, because you're constantly putting yourself to the sidelines, or you're worried that you're going to be judged for feelings about something that actually someone else has it a lot worse, well, someone's always going to have it a lot worse. That doesn't mean that what you're feeling is invalid. And I think this is one of the reasons why gender disappointment is such a taboo subject, because you're just lucky to have a child, and you are. But in achieving something, or in being incredibly lucky, I feel like every time something incredible happens to us, there is always something new which could become a mental stress or a concern or a difficulty in life. Nothing comes for free. I always think there's a balance to everything. You're never going to win the lottery and not have any stresses and struggles come with that. That doesn't mean that the person who's won the lottery is not allowed to feel those emotions purely because they've suddenly got it easy in life because they've won all the money in the world. It's not how it works. Emotions are still valid. They're just relative to your experiences. So thank you for anybody who is thinking that way or thinking of commenting saying, you know, just feel lucky and enjoy the fact that you're pregnant and you're having a child. I do. Please know that I do. And please also know that whatever we find out tomorrow, or in about 30 seconds for you guys, I will love this child and Hugh will love this child and we will be happy. And to be honest, I will probably tell them if it's a boy and we find out that it's a boy and then they're bored, and in 10 years time I'll probably tell them, well, say go check out that video where I was talking about wanting you to be a little baby girl. Because again, my current perception of what I see motherhood to be, and what I see my relationship with my child being, and what I see my preference in sex being, is no reflection of the actual human being that we are going to meet in 23 weeks time. It's just ridiculous. Of course it's not. It's almost nothing to do with them, because my viewpoint as a human will change on so many things in life in 23 weeks time. It already has done over the last 17 weeks. Over the last 17 weeks, my priorities have changed in life. The way I view money has changed. The way I view work has changed. The way I view friendships has changed. It's going to keep changing. That's just what life is. This is just a little moment in time. And so from one little moment in time to another, I'm gonna go and leave you with tomorrow's Imogen. Right guys, so we're back. Part 2, take 2, back from the sex scan. We went this morning and then we went for like a big breakfast, which was actually really disappointing. I love going to Joanna's in Crystal Palace, but we've never been for breakfast before. And I mean, this isn't what the video's about, but it was just a real letdown. Like, the eggs were obviously pre-cooked and kept warm. The pancakes were obviously cooked this morning, if not yesterday. They weren't great. They tasted almost baked. It was really disappointing. Anyway, went for the sex scan and it was a really interesting experience because they ask you if you want to know in the room or if they want to write it down in case you want to do one of those big gender reveal things, which we obviously don't want to do because you're about to find out. And so when they went and did the scan, she almost immediately did, I don't know, a different angle than they'd ever done usually doing the scans, and you could see straight away that the sex was a boy, which it must have taken about 3 seconds. It was super quick. And actually she did, so these are the scans. He looks huge, which is funny because he's only about, I don't know, the size of like an avocado, a bit bigger than that at the moment. But they do this scan, which I think you can see, the light might be shining on it, but it's basically leg and a penis, which the sonographer kept saying willy. And I'm sorry, but if you're a medical professional, we can use the proper terms, people. We can use the proper terms. Yeah, so I guess this video is actually quite a good one to do because technically this is, I suppose, gender disappointment. And I do have that real split feeling and emotions about it, because on one hand I am really, really sad, and on one hand I'm not, because I am excited for the boy that I can imagine. And I think I'm feeling slightly more level-headed about it. Like, to be honest, I'm feeling very in the middle. I'm not happy and I'm not sad. And I think that's because we picked out his name a few weeks ago and we hadn't picked out any girls' names. So because we found out that it was a boy, as soon as she said boy, I knew his name, and I felt like from that I could imagine this child. And I think if he didn't have a name associated with him, it would have just been a bit like, oh, okay, that's where we are. On the other hand, I totally get now why they talk about gender disappointment and all of the things that I'm suddenly thinking of. It makes me feel a bit teary. The things that you think about that are just not, it's not that they're not going to happen, but they're not going to shape up the way that I thought they would, you know? Like, shopping for baby clothes. We went to TK Maxx straight after we'd been to the gender scan just for a little nosy around, and partially because I knew that Home Sense would have all of the autumn stuff in already and Halloween stuff, so obviously went to do that. But loads of the clothes for the girls I loved and hated, to be honest, all of the boys' clothes. And things like I would love to be able to get matching or semi-matching cute outfits, which I know I can do with a boy. It just doesn't feel the same. And I'd envisaged myself like going stationery shopping for school and getting like really cute stationery sets and all that sort of stuff and getting excited with the girl, because that's what I got excited about when I was a kid. And I just can't envision that with a boy. And honestly, I'm like choking up. But I guess the important thing is none of this has anything to do with our actual son. And as soon as he's born, these emotions are going to completely disappear. And I'm sure in the next week or so, to be honest, these emotions are going to completely disappear. And this is what, so yesterday I put a little story out on my Instagram asking people about gender disappointment, and I had well over 100 messages from people just saying they'd felt that they had to hide the fact that they were so disappointed, and they felt like they were grieving their child because they'd got a different gender, and all of the, like, so many different women saying that they felt this way and that no one was talking about it, and they were really glad that someone was talking about it, which was lovely. But also all of them said as soon as their son was born, or as soon as their little girl was born, those feelings just went away, because you're sad about your idealized child, you're not sad about your actual child. And I think that's the really big distinction for me here with gender disappointment. I'm sad about the images that I've had for the last 29 years about what my child would be. I'm not actually sad. I'm not disappointed about who my actual child will be, because as soon as they're born, I will love them unconditionally. I know that I will. But I think you've got to be allowed to be upset for that interim period, I think. I'm allowed to be disappointed, and I'm going to continue to feel this way, I think, for a little bit. It's very odd. It's very odd. And I think partially I just feel emotional because I just know now. You know, you spend so long wondering, and even before you get pregnant, you're wondering what your first child will be, who your first child will be. And also, it's pretty important to say who they will be is far more important than what their sex is, and the person that they will be is so much more exciting. And also all the gender stereotypes that I have just spoken through about they won't love stationery, or maybe they won't want to dress up, and all of this rubbish is complete rubbish, because obviously they might love all of those things, and it's purely just, that's why I say it's nothing about the real child, because the real child, we haven't learned anything about them yet, and they're going to teach us all about them. It's this idealized child that you're almost putting to bed and you're saying goodbye to, and that's hard, I think. This is a heavier video than I thought it was going to be. But on the positive side, I am excited. It feels very real now. Very real. Now that we know the gender and we can talk about him as a human being, as a person, it's really lovely. I don't know why pronouns suddenly make him feel more real. They just do, and that might just be a personal thing, and I totally agree that his pronouns may change at some point in time when he's older, and that's totally fine. But for me, for now, having pronouns makes him feel like a more real entity, I think, and that's exciting. And also seeing him today was so cute. He does not stop moving. I can't believe I can't feel him yet, because he's just permanently, every scan we've had, he's just like rolling around and kicking everything, and you can't get a good heart rate monitor reading because he's just always banging about. So I think he's gonna be hyperactive. Anyway, I think that's your lot, guys. I think that's the video. Thanks for tuning in today. Make sure you do subscribe, do comment below and like if you're enjoying it, and always follow me on One Slow Sunday as well on Instagram, because that's where I am basically every day if you want to chat. Speak to you all soon. Bye.